It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and today we're taking a look at the films of June 14th, 2002. We got 3 films to look at today, so let's go ahead and get right to it. And we'll start off with the biggest new release of the weekend. I mean, people still got excited for it because we still like Scooby-Doo, but yeah, I couldn't imagine what that would have been like in theaters, seeing that in theaters for the first time, and everyone being like, "Oh, it's not a new Batman movie." But I may have just shown you the best thing about this movie, because this Scooby-Doo movie is not very good. Not very good indeed. You have a story here that's... the plot revolves around Mystery Incorporated, a group of 4 young adults and their talking dog who solve mysteries, who reunite after a 2-year disbandment to investigate a murder at a popular horror-themed tropical island resort. You have Freddie Prinze Jr. as Fred, Sarah Michelle Gellar as Daphne, Matthew Lillard in his first, what would be now his permanent performance as Shaggy, Linda Cardellini as Velma, and Neil Fanning as the voice of Scooby-Doo. This is written by James Gunn, too, who of course would later go on to create the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And Raja Gosnell directed this movie, and that should have been the red flag right there, that Raja Gosnell was the man who was attached to direct this. But, you know, the whole idea of this movie was actually much different than what it ended up becoming, because this was supposed to have a much darker tone to it, especially poking fun of the original series and kind of being like the Brady Bunch movie. And it was actually supposed to have sort of a PG-13/R rating to it. There was literally going to be scenes where Shaggy was said to be a stoner. There was a lot of marijuana references. There was also a lot of ideas that, you know, Velma and Daphne were lesbians. Like, it was really interesting to see how that would have played out. But of course, Warner Brothers said, nope, you can't do that. So you got to make a PG-rated film. And the cast has since joked about it for the longest time, that there were a lot of the original adult jokes still somewhere in the film and on deleted scenes and just anywhere in particular. I mean, the stuff is still out there. It's just unfortunately not in the final product, which really hurts the film in the long run, because unfortunately the movie is a really, really not great film. It's a film that's trying to have those little bit of the edges of making fun of itself, like the Brady Bunch movie. I mean, they take a shit on Scrappy-Doo a lot. Like, this movie hates Scrappy-Doo to the point where he turns out to be the film's villain, but that's cool. But unfortunately, what they do with him at the end, not cool. And it's just like we're really doing this with him. I mean, the movie has so many opportunities to actually be something. I mean, this has a good cast to it. Everybody's cast very well. That's probably the strongest thing about the movie, are the 4 leads. Freddie Prinze Jr., Sarah Michelle Gellar, Matthew Lillard, Linda Cardellini. I thought they all did a very good job of handling the roles that they were attached to. It's everything else, though, that really affects the film in the wrong way, because it feels like a film that's trying to be more edgier than it wants to be, but the studio is holding it back because they want a safe and marketable movie, because, heaven forbid, if we had a Batman Returns scenario again, even though people like Batman Returns, but the CG effects, too, are terrible as well. Like, Scooby-Doo does not look good with the CG. I mean, he looks terrible, and after all these years later, it still looks abysmal. I mean, it still looks incredibly bad. Like, it's amazing how bad this thing looks, because there's the opportunity that you can make to make a really good Scooby-Doo in CG, but not in this case. I mean, Scoob came close to trying to perfect Scooby-Doo, but unfortunately that movie also has a lot of flaws to it too. But I'm sorry, I'd still rather take Scoob over this thing, right? Easily. I know a lot of people like this movie. I know they have nostalgia feelings for it. I mean, they feel the same way that I kind of felt with the Flintstones movie back in '94. Like, it was also thrashed by critics when it came out, but there was at least more ambition to it, and there was more of the effort being put on the big screen. The script was just the problem with the film altogether. It's a mixture of the script, the studio interference, and the fact that Scooby-Doo looks pretty bad. The CG effects on him look really, really terrible, and he does not look like what we expect a live-action Scooby-Doo version to look like. I mean, you can make a better version of Scooby-Doo than this abomination that shows up on screen here. I mean, it's just a bad film. It's a really, really bad film, despite the efforts where you could feel like they were close to doing what they wanted to do in the beginning, because they have the people to make it work. They've got a good screenwriter. They've got a great cast to make these characters work. But there's just nothing there because the studio kept getting in the way. The script had to be forced down to being dumbed down to kids, and the effects looked terrible. Even for 2002, you expect so much better than this, but unfortunately, this is just the way the film has to play out. I guess it worked in their favor because it was a big hit, and it led to a sequel, and maybe by then they could actually do what they wanted to do with this film, and they're not going to do that. Sorry to give you a little bit of a spoiler for that movie, but we'll talk about that when we get to 2004. But Scooby-Doo. Next up, we have The Bourne Identity, the movie that kind of launched what the Jack Ryan franchise kind of dropped down to with The Sum of All Fears. I mean, this became kind of the new, what eventually became the new cool action franchise to do. I mean, Jack Ryan had a number of different great films over the course of the 90s, but then fell apart with The Sum of All Fears. But this was a nice pace, different pace for what the Jack Ryan films were accomplishing around that time. You have Jason Bourne, played by Matt Damon, suffering from psychogenic amnesia and is forced to fight to unlock his identity and his mysterious connection to the CIA. This is, of course, based off the Robert Ludlum stories of the same name. And this film went through a little bit of an interesting production history. There was a lot of things going on behind the scenes. The creators consistently clashed with the studio executives over the delays, the cost of the movie, the last-minute changes, the unexpected reshoots. I mean, this thing went through a lot of production problems, kind of like what happened with Scooby-Doo, except in the case of Scooby-Doo, that movie ended up being not great. This movie actually ended up working out pretty well, all things considered. I mean, it certainly is considered to be one of the most influential action movies of its time, and it helps having a great leading performance by Matt Damon in the role of Jason Bourne, where he makes it work so well. The casting overall in here is great. Franka Potente, Chris Cooper, Clive Owen, Brian Cox, Adewale Akinu Agbaje, who of course went on to become Killer Croc in Suicide Squad. I mean, just a really good cast overall here, and it's interesting how they almost went crazy with the casting on this movie. This thing has been in production for a while now, and and when they were casting the film, Doug Liman went to like various different people. Like he went to Brad Pitt, who turned it down to do Spy Game, and then Russell Crowe, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tom Cruise, and Sylvester Stallone were eventually considered. I mean, different ranges in age there. I mean, Russell Crowe was probably the youngest of that group. Tom Cruise is somewhere in the middle, and then Schwarzenegger and Stallone were probably the oldest. So it's probably a good thing that they didn't go with one of those guys. Even though I like all those guys. I like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I like Tom Cruise, Stallone, Russell Crowe. It was clearly too late for them, obviously. But Matt Damon made the role work well. He perfected the role of Jason Bourne. He makes him a very convincing character out of him. You really do believe in his cause. You really do believe that he wants to know what the hell's going on, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that he finds a way to figure it all out. And in the way that it's done here, it's very well done. The action sequences, phenomenal. Some of the best car chases you'll see in any action movie started with this film and would follow with the films by Paul Greengrass, and then of course with the other films in the series. This is a great film. It's a really solid film, a very entertaining film, a very engaging mystery. I mean, this really became the influential action film for the rest of the 21st century. And the Bourne movies kind of followed in the same path as the Jack Ryan movies, honestly, going back to Jack Ryan. You have 3 really good movies to start it off, and then you have that one little film that just takes it on a downward spiral with the Bourne Legacy, the one that doesn't have Matt Damon in. And then Jason Bourne comes around, the last film of the series, and actually turns that series around again. I know a lot of people didn't like the last Jason Bourne movie, but I liked it a lot. That one and this one are certainly not the best of the Bourne movies. We still have to get to the other two, the Bourne Supremacy and the Bourne Ultimatum, before we get to the best one of the series. But the Bourne Identity, man, the Bourne Identity is a fantastic film. If you haven't seen it, you're really doing yourself a huge disservice by not doing so. Check that one out. Which brings us to our last movie, and that is the war film Windtalkers, directed by John Woo and starring Nicolas Cage, based on the story of real code talkers from the Navajo Nation during World War II. In addition to Cage, you have Adam Beach, Peter Stormare, Noah Emmerich, Mark Ruffalo, and Christian Slater. And, this came around that time. We had all these different war movies coming around that, they couldn't compete with something like Black Hawk Down, which is still that best war movie that come out within that last 6 year span, within the 6 month span. But you had this, you had also Behind Enemy Lines, you had Hearts War, all these movies that were trying to be the next Saving Private Ryan. But really, Black Hawk Down took that a long time ago, and that was a great film on its own. This is just, it's just a boring movie, man. Like, it's not even a bad movie, it's just a boring movie. And for John Woo, give him credit for at least trying to go back to what made him the famed director that we know him for. But the movie just doesn't have anything of noteworthiness to it to make it stand out on its own. It's a very, very bland action movie, and it's supposed to be based on the real stories here, but it's often considered one of the most inaccurate military movies ever made. I mean, like, it's on a list with films like Pearl Harbor and Pearl Harbor, for God's sakes. I mean, if you're on the same list with Pearl Harbor and Fly Boys, that's not a good list to be on, unless you're talking about war movies that were released in the 2000s. But no, this isn't one of those lists. And, you know, even the action sequences in here aren't that engaging at all. They're just kind of mediocre, and the film just, it drags on. It's a boring story. You don't really get invested in any of these people whatsoever. This should be fascinating stuff here, and I think people don't want a movie like this. They want a movie where you can have the storyline going on here, but you have to make it more interesting for an audience that wants to that you're putting this out in the summertime. They want big action. They don't want something like a Pearl Harbor again, or even later on down the road with Fly Boys. They want something where you can get invested in the characters, you can get invested in the storylines going on here, and this movie just doesn't have that. I mean, it's a film that, I mean, John Woo said he's still proud of it, and I think he realizes that this probably wasn't the way to go with this type of film, especially since 9/11 had just come around the corner. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something here, but I just see another film that's trying to be the next Black Hawk Down, but it's more like Hearts War or Behind Enemy Lines. Just another war film that's unnecessary and doesn't really deliver anything of a true purpose to itself, except to be the next big war classic, and it's just not there, man. So yeah, that's Wind Talkers. And so with that said, we wrap up another edition of Time About the Movies, and the next time we meet, we'll take a look at 3 more movies, including Tom Cruise and Steven Spielberg's Minority Report, Disney's last big 2D animated hit before they eventually had the revival of their studio in the midway point of the decade, Lilo and Stitch. And we also have the film that was trying to be the next Tootsie and Mrs. Doubtfire, but failed miserably, Juwanna Mann. So we'll take a look at those movies on the next episode. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this, please hit the playlist on the next page, check out the previous episode, and also don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this on this channel. So with that said, I am off. I will see you guys next time, and until then, as always, take care.